Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It is the 13th of May today. Joining me in the studio this evening to analyse the news and stories today, first of all, Chris McCusker, regular contributor here from the SNP Socialist Group. Welcome back, Chris.
Good evening, Gordon.
Nice to see you back, Chris. And also joining us this evening, politician James Dornan, speaking from Edinburgh tonight, James.
Yeah, I am indeed.
Anyway,
always good to be here.
It's always nice to have you on the programme, James. Anyway, first of all, I have to give you the coronavirus update. And I can tell you that as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,959,362 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Now, of these, 1,730,669 have been confirmed negative. 228,693 have tested positive. There are 270 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There was one new reported death of a person who had tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who've now died from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infections now stands at 7,662. This number only includes those who've died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 63 were in hospital last night, 4 of whom were in intensive care. Also, as of 8 a.m. in this morning, 2,968,169 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 1,551,339 have received their second dose. Latest UK daily figures show that 127,651 patients who've tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. This is an increase of 11 since yesterday. And this number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. And now to tonight's main stories. And a Glasgow blockade of the Home Office eviction in a dawn raid, following a day-long protest by Glasgow citizens to prevent the detention of asylum seekers in a Home Office dawn raid. The police have agreed on the grounds of public safety that the asylum seekers should be released after having been detained in a Home Office van since this morning. When local residents on Kenmure Street in Pollokshields saw the arrival of the Home Office this morning, they shared the events on social media, and very quickly a crowd gathered to protest at the detention of the asylum seekers. Okay, as you can see, they are a very vocal crowd, and the move by the Home Office was protested also by the First Minister and the Justice Secretary, Humza Yousaf, and by politicians across Scotland.
I am angry and disgusted at the actions of the Home Office today. To take this action at any time is unwelcome in Scotland. To do so in the heart of the Muslim community on the day of Eid, where there have been outbreaks of COVID, is reckless, endangers health, and frankly looks like it was intended to provoke. I've spent hours trying to get the Home Office to abandon their operation. First, they passed me off to a civil servant when none of their 8 ministers would take my call when we objected after that. They eventually gave us the most junior ranking Home Office Minister to speak to the First Minister and I, and to say he was unhelpful, again, would be an understatement. Belligerently told us that they would continue to enforce immigration law as they saw fit. Now, I'm pleased and delighted, in fact, that Police Scotland, who of course have operational independence, Police Scotland have taken the decision in the interest of public safety, in the interest of public health, to release these 2 individuals. But immigration policy is, of course, reserved to the Home Office. And although these 2 individuals, and I'm pleased they have been released on this occasion, the hostile environment created by the UK government's immigration policies is something that is simply not welcome here in Scotland. And I will be urging the Home Secretary to speak to me and the Home Office to speak to me and to engage with the Scottish Government so that we simply do not see a repeat of these scenes, but more importantly, to tell them that their hostile environment is just not welcome in Scotland.
And as you can see, after a day-long standoff this evening, the police issued a statement saying, in order to protect public health and in the well-being, and health and well-being of all people involved in the detention and the subsequent protest in Kenmure Street in Pollokshields today, the Chief Superintendent Mark Sutherland has, following a suitable risk assessment, taken the operational decision to release the men detained by UK immigration enforcement back into their community meantime. In order to facilitate this quickly and effectively, Police Scotland are asking members of the public to disperse from the street as soon as possible. Please take care when leaving the area and follow the directions of the officers on the street. Now, first of all, I have to really talk to you, Chris McCusker, because I know that you were there on the scene this morning, Chris. What can you tell us about what happened this morning?
Well, basically, I wasn't there this morning. I was there this afternoon. I had to take my older brother for his second COVID jag. So, but when I get down there, roughly about 2:30, 2:45, clearly there was a very large crowd, and upon arrival there, I had quickly identified a few comrades, not least Rosa Salih, a good friend of this news station.
Yep.
And Rosa basically told me of the situation of the two men that had been detained by the UK Home Office and were cooped up in the van. And at that time, they had no water. They had been in there at that time for about 6 hours. By the time I had left at 5 o'clock, the two men had not even been released in order to go to the toilet. We had activists. We had one activist actually lying underneath the van in order to prevent the van from moving forward. We had several activists sitting in front of the van as well. And if you go to my Twitter feed, you'll see a picture. You've got about 60 to 100 people sitting down peacefully in Kenmure Street, basically protesting against the draconian measures taken by the UK Home Office, and it was a deliberate. They deliberately chose today. I can see as provocation. Today being the holy day of Eid, marking the end of Ramadan, and this was absolutely, totally unnecessary. The Police Scotland were there not to facilitate it. Police Scotland were there because I spoke actually to the commander in charge. And she assured me that she was not facilitating the UK Home Office, that they were there solely to ensure the health and safety of the crowd, and to also ensure that there were no repercussions from the actual gathering itself.
Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chris. I just wanted to ask a question that might be occurring to other people tonight. Police Scotland were there presumably just to keep people safe. Did they make any effort to move the protesters or ask them to move to allow the bus to exit from the street?
Not at all. No, that wasn't in Police Scotland's remit. This van was clearly marked as a UK Home Office van. It did not say Strathclyde Police on it or Scottish Police. It was a UK Border Force van, and when I was talking to the commander, the commander explicitly told me that the Scottish Police were not there in the capacity of facilitating the actual eviction. They were there solely to, I don't want to use the word control, but yeah, they were there to control the crowd and make sure that it didn't escalate into something else. They were not there to clear the streets or to hold people back. The police that I engaged with were very cooperative. I actually handed 2 bottles of water to a member of the police, to which he handed it to 2 individual police officers. I witnessed them take those bottles of water into the van in order that the 2 detainees had at least some sort of refreshment.
Okay, Chris.
And to actually point out as well, please, I must do this.
Okay.
All the time that this was going on, this is going on underneath the house of where these 2 men lived, and their father and the wife were in the house at the time, completely distraught, and they were not given any communication from the UK Border Office whatsoever into what is actually happening. And as I say, those men, in a total of 8.5 hours, were stuck in that van, and it is a cruel, pernicious action. Bearing in mind the fact that, and James will correct me on this, but bearing in fact that the Scottish Parliament actually clarified a moratorium that no evictions would take place during COVID.
Well, that's obviously been broken, Chris. James, what's your take on the events of today? How do you see this? Is it a deliberate provocation, do you believe, by a vindictive Home Office?
I think it's a show of strength by the Home Office. I think it's this whole we'll show Scotland for voting SNP again. This is it's the most dangerous government that we've ever faced. I don't believe that we've got anywhere near the end of where they would like to end up. I think that they want to be a completely dictatorial type government, that it's only a handful of people at the top that are going to be running this country to suit a certain class of people. They do not care about asylum seekers. They do not care about the ordinary working person. They only care about people of their own class, which they distinctly lack, as far as I can see. To do this in Eid, and to do this in the First Minister's constituency, and to do it when they knew that the First Minister wasn't going to be there because she was getting sworn in, shows 2 things. One is that they're trying to teach us a lesson, but they're also cowards. Because if they'd done it some other time, we could have taken them on.
So, James, your view is that this is not just a snatch squad sent in to intimidate the remaining asylum seekers or their families. This is the British government making a political statement that they're in charge, and people of Scotland will just have to stand back and let them do this.
Well, we're already seeing, what is it they're calling muscular unionism or something like that. It's what they do, and I think that it'd be a bit of a coincidence that it happened today on Eid and the day when we were getting sworn in. I just think that's a bit of a coincidence.
Okay, well, listen, let's draw a line under that for the moment. Of course, there are troubles in other parts of the world, and our next story takes us to Israel. And Israel has drawn up plans for a ground attack in Gaza. Israel's military is drafting a plan for a possible ground operation in Gaza as it presses ahead with a fierce air offensive on the enclave, and as Hamas responds with rockets fired into Israel. Racist mob attacks have continued to spread through Israel in the worst Arab-Jewish chaos for years. Overnight on Wednesday, far-right Jewish mobs took to the streets across the country searching for Arabs, while there were reports of attempted shootings as Palestinian citizens of Israel confronted Israeli police. The ground attack plans, which are in their initial stages and have not been approved, would be presented on Thursday to the military heads, who would consider whether to submit them to Israel's government, an army spokesperson said. Plans to intensify the operation came as Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, told colleagues in cabinet that the country had rejected a Hamas proposal for a ceasefire. The offer of a truce was made on Wednesday via the Russian Foreign Ministry, which quoted senior Hamas officials as saying that the Islamist group was ready to halt attacks on a mutual basis. Now, let me come to you first of all, Chris. I know that you have a particular interest in the plight of the Palestinians. Do we know what provoked this outbreak of extreme violence? Because there are conflicting stories that there was a kidnapping or a shooting. Both sides seem to be blaming each other, don't they?
Both sides do seem to be blaming each other, but we can't through this whole sordid, sorry episode, we can't overlook the fact that 17 children have been brutally murdered and had their lives taken away from them. And you know, the Netanyahu has actually set the mood by saying this is just the beginning. And he said that as Israel's bombardment of the besieged Gaza Strip intensified on the third day. And he also said we will hit them with strikes they have never dreamed of. Now,
Okay.
I've got to ask one pertinent question. What have the Palestinian people done to deserve this?
Well,
Absolutely
Chris, that's
nothing.
a good question. There were reports on other media today that that Hamas fighters had actually managed to penetrate Israel's so-called Iron Dome defense system by barraging them with multiple rockets, dozens and dozens of them. So I'm not sure how much damage these old-fashioned unguided rockets can do. But James, do you have a view on what's going on here? Why is this suddenly happening now? And what do you think has provoked this sudden outburst of violence?
I'm not as clued up on the Palestinian situation as Chris clearly is, but what I do know is that Netanyahu is a politician who is desperately holding on to power to keep himself out of jail, and I have got no doubts that he would see Palestinian lives as being a very cheap price to pay to keep him from facing all the charges that he'll be facing the minute that he stops becoming Prime Minister. The behaviour of Israel is not just the fault of Israel, it's the fault of countries like the United Kingdom, the United States, and others who sell weapons to them, who give them incredible support without asking anything of them. Why are we giving weapons to Israel, particularly America, but both the UK as well? Why are we giving weapons to them and continuing to support them without saying to them, but you have to stick to the 67 agreement, or you have to stick to some kind of well thought out plan that allows both of them to exist in well, maybe not in harmony right away, but at least both of them exist in a decent, civilized way, because the Palestinians just now appear to be living in a way that nobody should be forced to live, and land that at one stage was once their own.
Okay. Now, we're hearing, of course, that the whole issue was kicked off by the fact that Israel was planning to evict Palestinians from areas that they had traditionally lived in order to move in their own settlers. So obviously that would be a provocation. Chris, I gather that this kind of operation in the West Bank and in Gaza tends to happen fairly often when Israelis want a bit of land, that they will simply evict the Palestinians living there.
It's not just because they want a bit of land. You know, we've got videos virally going viral daily. You know, where actually Israelis are actually walking into people's houses and saying, "Well, you need to leave, because if it's not us that's going to take it, then it's going to be someone else." And that is the frame of mind of which they're in. Now, bearing in mind the fact that the Palestinian people have already made two considerations. If we look back to the Balfour Agreement and we look back to the treaty, the Camp David, the Palestinian people have given back, you know, just as much in order to attain peace. But the Israeli government are continuing their aggression. We've now got, we actually see them now mobilising tanks onto the border. So nothing can go in to Palestine and nothing can go out. And you know, and it's deeply atrocious. As James said, the facilitators in this, you know, are the UK government. And the US government. Hopefully, now that Biden is in, then we'll see, we will start to see a decline in the arms sales. But you know, make no mistake, what arms that the Israeli government have got, their capability dwarfs the Palestinian capability, which they do not want to use. They are only using it in retaliation. It dwarfs it 10-1. I have to point out that the indictments and crimes of Netanyahu escalate to a sum total of over 5,000 outstanding court issues that he has yet to answer for. And there is no allegedly that can actually be attached to that, because it is all well documented. And the only problem is, again, is the fact that the Western media are actually complicit as well and standing by and not reporting the real problems of what is actually befalling the Palestinian people.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much for obviously a very passionate view there. Now we are looking at the European Union, and EU citizens arriving in the United Kingdom are being locked up and expelled. EU citizens are being sent to immigration removal centres and held in airport detention rooms as the UK government's hostile environment policy falls on them after Brexit, according to reports in The Guardian. Europeans with job interviews are among those being detained and denied entry and locked up. They have spoken of being subject to the traumatic and humiliating experience of expulsion, despite Home Office rules which explicitly allow non-visa holders to attend interviews. Confusion about whether the EU citizens can explore the UK job market and then go home with an offer in order to apply for a work visa has added to the growing number of detentions. In other cases, visitors are clearly breaking rules, such as those now barring EU citizens from taking up unpaid internships. At least a dozen European citizens, mostly young women, were detained and expelled at Gatwick Airport alone over 48 hours last week. 2 female Spanish detainees told The Guardian. Some were sent 2 hours drive away to Yarlswood Detention Centre in Bedfordshire, where the risk of COVID meant that they were confined to their rooms. Other countries whose citizens have been held at the UK airports or detention centres include Italy, France, Bulgaria and Greece. It's understood one French man was held at Edinburgh Airport for 48 hours recently, while the Bulgarian ambassador to the United Kingdom confirmed a number of his nationals have been held at immigration removal centres. James, let me turn to you first of all for a comment on this. We were speaking just a few moments ago, of course, about this so-called hostile environment of immigration. But this sounds like the British government hasn't a clue how to deal with European citizens who are perfectly legally entering the country either to attend job interviews or for other legitimate purposes.
I said earlier on, I thought that this was probably the most wicked government that we've ever had in my lifetime. They're also the most incompetent government, and that is a really, really dangerous combination, because what happens then is things like you've just been outlining there. People suffer because of their incompetence, but also because they believe that, coming from the likes of Priti Patel and others, that this is the type of rule that we should be putting in place. That's what she wants to see. It's that who will rid me of this damn priest type thing. So when you combine stupidity, incompetence, and just pure badness, then you get situations such as this. That this country, I'm talking about United Kingdom here just now, is going to end up completely and utterly friendless if they continue to act the way they're doing. They're talking about building relationships with other countries. It's just not going to happen, because they just do not know how to keep friends and how to behave in a civilised manner.
James, it must be almost impossible for somebody like Priti Patel to square this circle of wanting to be in friendly terms with other countries, but being so manically xenophobic that you want to keep all of them out. I mean, how on earth is a Tory government ever going to do a trade deal with any country?
Well, it's just what I go back to. There's no forward thinking. There's no forward thinking by a lot of people involved in it. I do believe that there's a long-term plan, and I was talking about that earlier on. But they don't seem to be able to understand how to get from here to there, whilst trying to keep people on board at the same time. And these sort of mistakes are going to happen, but it's not going to be them that suffer. It's going to be people that are trying to improve their lives, or people at the lower end of the scale, or particularly foreigners, because this has become an incredibly xenophobic and racist country.
I'm just waiting, James, for a Scots person to be stopped at the English border and detained as an immigrant. That'll be the next thing, eh? Anyway, Chris, let me come to you. Chris, what's your opinion of Priti Patel and her snatch squads and her detaining perfectly legitimate travellers at Britain's airports?
Well, again, she was she was at the centre of focus today in Kenmure Street because it was her department that was carrying out the dawn raid. But I'd actually like to pick up one unfortunate incident of an Italian young lady who was coming over here to act as, for want of a better word, an au pair to her uncle, who actually works in the NHS, and she was detained and imprisoned on arrival at Heathrow Airport. And she actually talks of the horror as they took her to prison. She burst into tears, and this was the start of my nightmare. Having recently graduated from an Italian university, she had chosen to take a gap year out in order to help her family look after the children of the medical practitioner in the UK NHS, and her documents were not seemed valid or viable. And again, James points it out wonderfully, the fact that this is a classic case of how not to win friends and influence people. Because no country in the EU are wanting to openly do trade deals with a xenophobic right-wing Britain that is so insular in itself that it prioritises 200 million for a yacht, in commemoration of a grandfather that happened to expire, after a long and privileged life.
Yeah, and of course he was a Greek immigrant, Chris, wasn't he?
Yeah. But for by the fact that he was an immigrant and on his own, whatnot, what have you, is the fact that they're prioritising that money over the likes of food banks, over the likes of proper health provision for the asylum seekers that are actually coming into the country, who are actually being treated on arrival as criminals.
Yeah.
So they are actually being convicted before they have actually been able to put a case across. Okay. And one other thing that I wanted to point out, which actually pertains to this afternoon, is the fact that the two detainees in the van were denied access to a paramedic until at least 4 o'clock this afternoon, and they were also denied access to legal representation. And those two detainees were discharged into the care of Amir Anwar. That was the criteria that the Home Office allowed to let them go.
Okay.
Chris,
want
to do.
Chris, we have to move on. I'm sorry. I'd like to talk more about this, but we simply don't have the time this evening to cover it all. So we do have to move on, and to news that Alison Johnston has become the presiding officer in Holyrood. As MSPs were sworn in at Holyrood today, there was an acknowledgement of the diversity which now sits in the Scottish Parliament, with 43 new MSPs taking their seats. The Green MSP, Alison Johnston, was elected as the new presiding officer, as Ken McIntosh handed over on his last day in the job. In a tweet, Mr McIntosh said, "Signing off as presiding officer, and so pleased to be passing the gavel to Alison Johnston. I have every hope that with 43 new MSPs, this is another refreshed Scottish Parliament which will deliver for the people of Scotland."
I'm Alison Johnston. I'm absolutely delighted to have been elected as the Scottish Parliament's 6th presiding officer. only the second woman, and I'd really like to make sure that debate in this chamber is as inclusive and tolerant and respectful as it possibly can be, while at the same time making sure that everyone has an opportunity to be fully involved and to represent their constituents to the best of their ability. I'm really pleased to see that we have a more diverse Parliament than we've previously returned. I think that's good progress. There's still more to do there. I'd also like to make sure that we make the Parliament a very family-friendly place, and also one that takes into account the needs of those with other caring responsibilities. It's not always children, sometimes it's elderly parents, but there's work to be done, but I'm very much looking forward to getting on with that in the next few days.
As Alison Johnston there introducing herself. James, let me speak to you first of all. It's very refreshing, isn't it, to have a new presiding officer, especially one who, if I'm right in thinking, is a Green MSP. So the first time we've really had an MSP from the Green Party and a woman, and she's obviously emphasising the inclusiveness of our Parliament and how many more women MSPs there are and how wide the representation is. Do you feel that the Scottish Parliament is setting a benchmark, particularly for the rest of the United Kingdom, when it comes to this kind of representation?
I think that the Scottish Parliament has been showing that for some time, but I think this is a really, really interesting appointment. Selection. Alison is a very good MSP. She is even-handed in any dealings that we've ever had with her. She's always been even-handed. She'll take everybody's view into account, and I think that she'll be excellent in the chair. But she does send out a message. Having a Green MSP, or previously Green, now that she's no longer any member of any party, whilst we have COP26 coming to Scotland, coming to Glasgow, could send out a very powerful message. It really it sends out that we take the environment very seriously and that we will be looking to do things differently. The Parliament has always wanted to move forward and make it more family friendly, and Alison is clearly keen to run with that, and I think that's a really, really good thing for the Parliament to be doing. And yes, it does. It sends out a message certainly to Westminster about how things should be done. Come into the 21st century and stop living in the 17th.
Do you think, James, that from a political viewpoint, not having a United Kingdom Party MSP as the presiding officer will A, send a message to London, and B, will it make a difference, do you think, in the way that debates are conducted?
I don't want to be saying too much here about that, because I think that we have to allow Alison to do the job in her own way. She will not be, I'm sure she won't be deliberately obstructive to anybody. I think it was a sensible thing for us not to go for it. But given that there is a majority of, if you're talking about the constitutional debate, a majority on that side of the debate, it did make more sense that it was somebody from that side who took the chair. But at the end of the day, she's now in a neutral position on the chair, and I'm sure that she'll behave accordingly.
Well, I expect so. Chris, what's your opinion? Alison Johnston, a good appointment? It certainly sounds like it.
Well, perhaps James can't say it, obviously, due to his position, but, I certainly can. And I would hope, after viewing Alison many a time in debate, she would be very quick to jump on any derogatory comments coming from the unionist benches, shall we say. I think she will be a wee bit more robust than Ken McIntosh, who, I have to say is an Eastwood constituent. He was MSP for Eastwood for a long time before they took up the gavel. But I couldn't, something just didn't let, pass it by, the fact that he was once previously Labour. So, it's like a referee at a football match and stuff like that, where you're actually guessing these real, true allegiances.
Yeah.
Like that. We all know about Douglas Ross and stuff like that, yes. With the classic red card. I think it was it to Scott Brown? But yeah, you know, and he was mouthing off, and you know, quite clearly it wasn't his position to say so. But the one thing that I did take away from today is the amount of affirmations that were made in other languages. We had Zimbabwean from Maggie Chapman, who I thought her pretext was absolutely wonderful. You know, that she took the oath under protest, and you know, many other members done a similar pretext to actually taking the oath. As I said, there was one of the members, I think, actually made their affirmation in Urdu. So you know, so again, that's absolutely wonderful. But the one, and I can't remember her name, and I should do, but she actually signed her affirmation so that her father could understand it.
That's an interesting
because her father is deaf. So
Karen Adams,
you know, so
Chris.
that. Yeah, Aaron Adams. That to me was a wonderful gesture, and you know, again, that does show that you know, the Parliament is moving in the right direction, and you know, definitely, you know, and I just hope that it's going to be more accessible to you know, members of the public and you know, families and the likes, and also to disabled people. Because I know that it was in my time as acting as a PA for my friend Colette Walker. I know that it was you know, just a wee bit dicey trying to manoeuvre some of the stairs and some of the corridors and stuff
partially sighted.
So yeah, if that brings you know, that on, then that'll be absolutely wonderful.
Okay, listen, thank you, Chris. We'll have to leave that subject there, and now we're moving to the subject of David Cameron, who has denied financial reward and motivated his Greensill lobbying. The former Prime Minister, David Cameron, said today that he was not motivated by his own financial interest when he lobbied government on behalf of the now collapsed supply chain finance firm Greensill Capital. Although Mr Cameron's extensive lobbying efforts did not result in policy changes, they have raised questions about the extent to which former UK ministers can or should use their status to try to influence government policy. Mr Cameron declined to say how much he was paid by Greensill or how much he would have made from shares he owned if the business had prospered. But he said he had a big economic investment in its future and wanted the business to succeed. I was paid an annual amount, a generous annual amount, far more than I earned as Prime Minister, he told the House of Commons Treasury Committee. James, let me turn to you first of all on this. Now, there has been obviously a great deal of talk about the sleaze surrounding the Conservative Party and its ministers and former ministers. This is yet another one of these stories, isn't it, about cronyism, that David Cameron's trying to use his influence with his own party to secure funds from what essentially were emergency funds for struggling businesses so that his firm could lend money to other businesses, which it was never designed to do, was it, that funding?
No. It's just another example of what we've been talking about. The rest of the country was looking at COVID as a disaster, and the Tories were looking at it as an opportunity. And that's one of the most shameful things over the last 15, 18 months, where they saw business opportunity, they saw a way of making sure that their friends or those that donate to the party could make money out of it. And that is something that should come back and haunt them. And at some stage, I hope it will. I mean, just now it seems like the people of the UK are immune to scandals, but hopefully at some stage that it will come back and get them. And Cameron's at it. You know, You don't send, 60 phone calls or something to somebody to try and get them to lobby for somebody if you don't expect something huge in return. And even if it was for nothing, he should not have been doing it because it's about the best use of the taxpayers' money. He shouldn't have been trying to get something to benefit one private firm at the cost of many others.
Indeed. Chris, let me turn to you for your reaction to this. Now, James has just been saying what many people have been thinking, which is that this is a former Prime Minister whose own business venture is on the brink of collapse and is desperately grasping for any money he can get. And this was a man who wanted to plunder a public fund for his own benefit, which was intended to help struggling small businesses across the UK. How can that be right?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it's not right. But again, this was a man who made a grandiose speech in the House of Commons before he left the office, basically saying that lobbying as such, you know, the whole industry surrounding lobbying should be looked at because it is basically being exploited by capitalists. You know, and that's just it. You know, and James is exactly correct. Is the fact that they have used their capitalist credentials in order to financially benefit out of other people's misery. You know, but I mean that is the raison d'etre of you know, being a Tory, as far as I'm concerned. Tories have been renowned for making money off of the back of people less fortunate. You know, I mean, you only have to look at the social security state, you know, for that. You know, whether they're quick enough to take people's money off them,
Yeah.
You know, and not repay it. You know, far less actually get, you know, give anybody an apology for it. So you know, it's you know what capitalists do, and that's just the be all and end all of it.
And as you say, it doesn't seem to matter what the Conservative Party does, people still keep voting for them. Anyway, moving on to the kind of results of this kind of capitalism, I suppose you could say, is our next story. Food bank figures were laid bare the impact, I beg your pardon, of the UK's welfare cuts. Food bank figures released today by the Trussell Trust should serve as a wake-up call to the UK government, say the SNP, as they lay bare how the UK government cuts and policies have pushed families and disabled people into poverty and destitution. The Trussell Trust report, State of Hunger, revealed that 95% of food bank users were destitute and 62% of working-age people referred to food banks in early 2020 were disabled, more than 3 times the rate in the working-age population. Just last month, it was revealed that there had been a 63% rise in food bank parcels handed out in Scotland over the last 5 years, with one emergency food parcel handed out to a child every 7 minutes. In the same month, the UK government was taken to court over whether it acted unlawfully by not giving 2 million people on legacy benefits the same £20 per week increase as those on universal credit at the start of lockdown. James, again, this is another piece of evidence, isn't it, and a long trail of bits of evidence showing the disastrous wake that these disaster capitalists have created as they plough their own furrow and line their own pockets. We have families, disabled people being disproportionately affected and having to go for food handouts. This is the 21st century, isn't it? This shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, but apparently, was it Matt Hancock or one of the other lookalikes that are in the Tory government said that it was food banks were really for people that were just a couple of weeks out of pocket. So it's not really those that are destitute that use them. It's just somebody in between jobs or something. I mean, seriously, they will say anything bar the truth. Every single story that we spoke about tonight has made the case for independence stronger. Every single one of them has shown that this government doesn't care a jot about it, and that includes the Israeli story, because we're selling them arms, and it doesn't matter how much people are destroyed by it. Excuse me, please. I wonder if you could go to Chris. I'm going to have to get a drink of water.
Okay, Chris, James obviously struggling there with a bit of a frog in his throat. But what he's saying there about the UK government making money out of disaster, basically, this just seems to become a bit of a pattern with them, doesn't it?
It does. And at one time, if you remember, they were citing the fact that there are more food banks in the UK than there is McDonald's outlets. And now we see that you can combine that alongside not just McDonald's, but KFC and Burger King as well. and dare I say, possibly Subway.
Other food outlets are available, Chris.
Other food outlets are available, yes. Aye, but the point that I'm trying to make is the fact that exponentially, food banks are becoming an increasing commonplace within the community. And this has been perpetuated by the Tory party because of their austerity cuts. If you look back into the days of the likes of 1970 and 1980s during the Thatcher years, that we didn't have food banks, and the people in the community, would often, like if they knew that their family was struggling, they would hand over a pan of mince or a pot of soup.
Yeah.
And that was, just that, or, oh, can I borrow a pint of milk, and never ask for the pint of milk back.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Chris. Chris, I don't know about you, but I remember the days, because I was a young man during the Thatcher period, and I can't remember anybody being poor enough that they actually starved. I mean, most of the people who were unemployed, obviously, were getting benefits. They weren't great, but we didn't starve. What's changed?
Well, you see, I mean, it's actually quite funny that you mentioned that, because at that time there were no draconian sanctions in place, and what you would terminalise the old DHSS, yeah, or as Glaswegians affectionately called it, the SS.
Or the
and such as then their draconian actions. There were no sanctions. And then gradually they brought in, oh, you didn't turn up for your job interview and all the rest of it, yada yada yada, and you were given a hard time. But the overriding thing about this is the fact, and I can speak with a bit of authority here, because my elder brother, whom I care for, is on full benefits. He's got a DLA for his mental imposition. And he gets a couple of other benefits and stuff like that. But and I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but down to good management of his finances, I've not felt the need to approach a food bank for James. But then I'm in the nuanced position of where I know exactly what he likes to eat, and I know exactly where I can get it at a reasonable price, so I don't feel that I should burden the state any further than what is actually necessary. But for by the fact that I'm not using a food bank, in balance to that, because of the pandemic, I'm not able to access social services for James because they've been cut back.
Of course.
And this is detrimental to his mental health, because I can't be there 24/7 in order to take him out for a walk.
Understood, Chris.
And there was also a recent survey of people that are actually not using food banks and are actually just snacking out on sort of like convenience food, like Quavers and Mars bars and whatnot and what have you.
Yeah, of course.
And you are also adding on to the fact that people are becoming obese because they're not being able to go out and exercise because the actual social care isn't there in order to help them out.
Okay, Chris, I think I understand the message that social care has been cut back and is actually fueling the crisis. Anyway, we've just got time for our last story before we leave for this evening. Okay, the US Attorney General says that white supremacist groups pose... I beg your pardon, sorry, James, I beg your pardon, I'm so quick to cut Chris off at the end of his speech there. I missed you out, I do apologise. You have an opinion, James, of course, on food banks and the rise in food banks.
The rise in food banks have been happening for some time, and some of the benefit changes that have caused the rise of food banks didn't just start under David Cameron's Tory government. They were in there before that through Tony Blair, Gordon Brown. They started this cutting away at the benefits that people were entitled to. And that's one of the things that's a real shame, because people like myself brought up to believe the Labour Party were there to support those that needed it most, and they didn't. They just didn't. But of course, what happened was, as Margaret Thatcher said, Tory was her legacy. And it's just carried on the way right through here. And if you start down that track, you end up where you are now. We've got the fifth richest country in the world. We've got people who are struggling to eat on a daily basis, and they're growing by the day. And if it wasn't for the everyday people in this country, we'd have people dying in the streets through starvation, malnutrition, and it's absolutely scandalous. They'll do everything they can to cut public spending, except for public spending that benefits their benefactors.
Including £800 rolls of wallpaper, apparently. Anyway, I apologise to James there for not giving you a chance to speak earlier on, James. Do apologise. Anyway, on to our final story this evening, and it's the United States. The US Attorney General says that white supremacist groups pose a rising threat in the US. Domestic violent extremist groups, particularly white supremacists, pose a growing threat to the United States. Attorney General Merrick Garland told the Senate panel yesterday. The threat of lethality is higher than it ever was. I have not seen a more dangerous threat to democracy than the invasion of the US Capitol by rioters on January the 6th, said Garland, who as a prosecutor led the investigation into the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. Garland noted that the FBI recently said that the top domestic violent extremist threat facing the United States is from racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas told the committee that racially or ethnically motivated extremists are most likely to conduct mass casualty attacks against civilians, while people tied to the right-wing militia groups are the most likely to target police and government employees and buildings. Garland and Mayorkas said that they were concerned about how disinformation and misinformation spread on social media, and Mayorkas said that such false narratives can instigate violence. James, let's start with you first this time. America has historically had a huge sort of slash down the middle, hasn't it? There's been this black and white division in American politics and in its social cohesion for decades. But now we seem to be seeing a really ugly, violent side coming out from the far right. And do you think this is a trend that's developing across the United States?
I think it's been happening for a number of years, and I think what's happened is that with that sort of inherent racism in America, that any sign of Muslim terrorism has been, jumped on quite rightly, but any sign of even mass killings by a white person is never treated as a terrorist act. And I think what's happened is that the January the 6th, it all came home to roost, the birds came home to roost, and we've had a president there that was encouraging. We've had people like Bannon and others who have been encouraging for some time and building up right-wing connections all across the world. There's a difficult time ahead, and I think that America has got a really difficult time in dealing with this, because these people are now well armed, they're well organised, and they should have been dealt with decades ago, and then wouldn't have been allowed to get to this stage.
Okay, Chris, let me turn to you. Of course, in America, gun ownership is pretty much a normal thing, isn't it? And militia groups in the United States form as if they were, golf clubs. They have multiple members, they go shooting, they dress in camouflage and see themselves as some kind of vigilantes. So there obviously is a threat from them, isn't there, Chris?
Well, I mean, it has to be pointed out that, the gun image in America is brought to the forefront of the human psyche because it has been written into their constitution. The fact that several states, are, it is perfectly lawful and permissible in order to carry a gun, and these gun type people have, it is like a cancer. For me, it is very much like a cancer. It's like sectarianism is taught in the home from father to son. In America, you know, fathers can't wait until their sons are actually walking so that they can take them out and show them how to, you know, properly shoot a gun. And that when you get that narrative into your head at a young age, you know, it's very much like sectarianism. It's like, right, okay, it's a Saturday, I'm going to march and stuff like that. You know, you know, just because I'm a religion. So, you know, the parallels between the two are distinctly different, but are intrinsically linked when you think of the fact that it is an indoctrination, you know, of white supremacy. The fact that you know that they actually see themselves as defenders of the country.
Okay, well, Chris, I'm going to give you the last word today because we're virtually out of time. But it just remains for me to thank both Chris McCusker and James Dornan this evening for joining me, and also to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland is having a crowdfunder. So if you'd like to support us, either by becoming a regular supporter for £5 a month, or if you wish to just make a single donation, you can do so by following the instructions at the bottom of your screen. You can also volunteer if you wish. But that's about all we have time from this particular edition of Scotland at 7. I'll get my teeth back in. And I'll see you again, hopefully, on Tuesday night when I'll be back hosting the show. But from all of us here in the studio, a very good night to you.
I'm Alison Johnston. I'm absolutely delighted to have been elected as the Scottish Parliament's 6th presiding officer, only the second.